pressed record? Hopefully, okay, good. So this morning, I want to speak on self-compassion. Really, I have spoken on it before, but it's a subject that I think is so important because in our lives, in our busy lives, in the busy life that everybody lives in this world, sometimes we only have ourselves, to self-soothe. Sometimes we just happen to only have ourselves to nurture ourselves, and to take care of ourselves. It'd be great if we always had a comforter beside us in any and every moment we needed it, but we can be that for ourselves, and to become good at that and to understand how we do that, I think is incredibly valuable with the demands of living on the planet, these days. To be an instrument of love in the world, we say that Gandhi's prayer, I offer you peace, I offer you love. But to be able to offer love, we ourselves have to feel loved up, right? You know that metaphor, you can't give from an empty well, right? The Marshall Rosenberg, who taught nonviolent communication, he says, as we affirm the beauty of our own needs, we greatly increase our power to meet the needs of others with great joy. Don't you like that? I'm going to say that again. As we affirm the beauty of our own needs, we greatly increase our power to meet the needs of others with great joy. I recently took my little brother to the emergency room. A couple months ago, looked like he broke his ankle, and he's been limping around for a few months. And he is so busy caretaking his partner, who is wheelchair bound, that he just never took himself to the ER. And a few months went by, and it just stayed really swollen and really hard to walk on. So I finally got him to go. I got him to meet me at the ER, and because I'm an advocate for him so much more than he is. And, we were in the ER and we waited for hours. And there were so many bigger emergencies, though, that day, that we only got to go in and see the nurse. But we did get to hear from the nurse that it didn't look deformed. And, so that made me feel like maybe it isn't broken. But we never did get to get the x-ray. We had to go wait. And by 3 hours, we had to go because he had to go take care of his partner. He can't leave her alone for long. But when we hugged goodbye that day, and just being together, it was so nourishing for us both. But when I hugged him, I just held him. I just held him so close, and I just said, "Oh, Travis, I wish you loved yourself as much as I love you, even half as much as I love you, because if you did, you would just take such good care of yourself." And I felt, I saw his eyes water like mine are right now, just thinking about it. And, I just felt him really taking in the love. Like I could feel like his being was kind of starved of it, like he's just giving, 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 always caretaking, always caregiving. And at like this moment when he was finally feeling like how much his sister loves him, it was just like, oh, it just was like, oh, finally, I'm getting a drink from the well, So, I tell that story because I think a lot of us, might really relate to that, to that fact that, you know, we don't, we think of ourselves last sometimes. We put ourselves last sometimes. We're the last ones to receive our care. There's this beautiful quote, one of my favorite quotes from the Buddha. He says, "You can look the whole world over and never find someone more worthy of love than yourself." Please remember that quote. So self-compassion is basically treating ourselves the same way we would treat a dear friend who's having a hard time. If we can take care of us like the most loving person would, the most loving person in our lives would, then we'd have greater well-being and we'd be able to help others more. Sometimes having compassion, having compassion is really multifaceted. Sometimes we're more compassionate and we take better care of our body than maybe our mind, or maybe we take care of our emotional body but not our physical body. So it's this multifaceted way that self-compassion is important. Sometimes there's a harsh inner critic. I think a lot of people have that inner roommate that's judgmental and, telling us we never do enough. Does anybody deal with that? Or that we're not good enough somehow, no matter what we do. And so that part of self-compassion is learning how to relearning how to speak to ourselves. One of the ways that I'm kind to myself is I call myself precious. Somebody named me precious 35 years ago, and when I want to be sweet to myself, I call myself that because it was very endearing when he named me that. There's this powerful poem. Gosh, this has been my favorite poem this week. It's so amazing, from Jeff Foster. It says it all. If abandonment is the core wound, the disconnection from mother, the loss of wholeness, then the most potent medicine is this ancient commitment to never abandon yourself, to discover wholeness in the whole mess, to be a loving mother to your insides, to hold the broken bits in open awareness, to hold the broken bits in open awareness, to illuminate the sore places with the light of love. That really is our journey. How can we find wholeness in the whole mess? Right? How can we not abandon ourselves even when we wish we'd done better? And, the commitment to never abandon ourselves, I think that is so worthy, so important. Last Sunday, Cindy gave me this wonderful book that she received for her birthday, and it's the sweetest, sweetest story. I've now found out it's a movie, so I'm going to have to watch that. But it's about these 4 friends that form an unlikely friendship: a boy, a mole, a fox, and a horse. And they, the boy comes upon the mole, and they strike up this conversation, and they become friends. And together they share wisdom and they share kindness. And then they come upon a fox who's stuck in a snare. And at first the fox is menacing. He's like, "Oh, I'll kill you if I could just get out of the snare, But the mole, sweet little mole that he is, he goes and he chews through the snare. And then, of course, they become friends, the fox. And so then they wander about and they come upon a horse, a wise horse. And they all hang out together in these beautiful places in nature. And they contemplate the meaning of life. In one conversation, the boy says, "Sometimes I feel lost." And the mole replies, "Me too, but we love you. And love brings you home. I think everyone is just trying to get home." A little later, the horse reaches down and he puts his muzzle, his nose up against the boy's head. And he says, "Life is difficult, but you are loved." And the boy replies, "So you know all about me?" And the horse says, "Yes." "And you still love me?" "Oh, we love you all the more." And the boy says, "Sometimes I think you believe in me more than I do." And the horse replies, "You'll catch up." I love that. There's another moment in the book when the horse is lying on the ground and the boy is lying against him. He's up against his shoulder with his head resting on him. And the boy asks the horse, "What do we do when our hearts hurt?" And the horse answers, "We wrap them with friendship, shared tears, and time, till they wake up hopeful and happy again." And the boy asks the horse, do you have any other advice?" And the horse says, "Don't measure how valuable you are by the way you are treated. Always, always remember you matter, you're important, and you are loved, and you bring to this world things no one else can." So I love this story. The horse is such a good friend to the little boy. He's such a wise horse. And it's so simple. The words are so simple, but we need to be reminded of them, and we need to know that they're true, right? Is that God calling? I think so. We're in that place where that happens. So this story reminds me of when I was a little girl. When I was 10, we lived in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and my mom got me a horse, and his name was Sunset. Have I talked about Sunset? Probably. But I used to go out to the barn in the evening sometimes. My mom and stepdad, sometimes they'd have arguments, and I would go out to the barn and I'd lay against Sunset. He'd be laying on the ground, and I'd just put my head against his shoulder, and I'd just tell him, all my feelings, share all my feelings. A lot of times I'd just cry into his fur. And I felt his love. I could feel that he loved me being there. And, it was just this vibration. It was so healing just to be with him. So I just so relate to that. You know, my point today really is, can we give ourselves the loving kindness when we don't have a horse to talk to? We don't have a dog to talk to or a cat. You know, Part of the reason I've always loved the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, I share them a lot, is because he is so full of compassion. You can feel that he's just an embodiment of compassion for himself, for everyone, for the whole life journey. So I found a poem by him. He says, I hold my face between my hands. No, I'm not crying. I hold my face in my two hands to keep the loneliness warm. Two hands protecting, two hands nourishing, two hands preventing my soul from leaving me in anger. Sometimes we have overwhelming emotions that are louder than self-compassion, right? Gosh, I can't tell you how many emotions I felt in the last week. I am so human. We are all so human, and it's such a relief to just say that's okay. It's perfectly okay. All that we feel, that's part of self-compassion, is allowing it when emotions come up, when we're feeling hurt, when we're feeling disappointed, when we're feeling angry, when we're feeling sad. As soon as we accept those feelings, it's the beginning of self-compassion. One of the things that gets in the way of our giving ourselves self-compassion is feeling like it's selfish. And I think there's some confusion about that. Sometimes we feel guilt. We don't think we deserve compassion. Especially if we've done something that we don't feel good about, and we don't want to give ourselves compassion because we equate it with letting ourselves off the hook. But really, we can hold ourselves accountable. We can be accountable and at the same time hold a space to love ourselves. And that takes some skill. Kristen Neff wrote a wonderful book, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. And she describes 3 elements of self-compassion. And the first one is so important, and that is to cultivate self-kindness versus self-judgment. I think that really comes into play when we have to choose between taking care of ourselves and making other people happy. Does anybody ever have to make that choice between taking care of yourself and making someone else happy? We struggle sometimes with discerning being loving with healthy boundaries, right? Have you ever, for instance, listened to people longer than you want to? Anybody? Do you feel like you have to fulfill every obligation 110%? I do. That's for me to work on, that's for sure. Is your motto, me last? Many of us have childhood conditioning and training to be nice and give up our needs. And maybe we're just now learning how to honor our needs and have healthy boundaries. And we're finally realizing our needs are as valid as anyone else's. Kelly Bryson, in his book, Don't Be Nice, Be Real, wrote, whenever our niceness allows another to oppress us and prevent us from getting our needs met, we either resent ourselves or we resent the other, or we resent both. I would go so far as to call it a form of violence. It is the violence of self-abandonment. There's that word again, self-abandonment. that reminder not to abandon ourselves. So, taking care of ourselves sometimes does mean disappointing others. And this is where we need to give ourselves the understanding and the compassion that others aren't able to offer. You remember that song, I went to a garden party? Come on, sing the chorus. Well, it's all right now. I learned my lesson well. Well, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. I love it. Okay, I'm going to learn that one. I think I used to sing that like in a past life. That was great, you guys. Guys, did you hear that on Zoom? That was so good. So, can we be understanding to ourselves when, we feel like we're not pleasing everyone or we feel like we failed in some way? I have a friend that's a deeply kind person, and she's a dedicated, devoted wife and mother. She works really hard. She also volunteers at 2 charities. She's kind of an ideal role model. But she's in therapy because her stress levels are so high. She's tired all the time and she's depressed and she can't sleep. And she's got chronic digestive problems, and she finds herself at times snapping at her husband and her kids and even her friends. And through all of that, she's hard on herself and she has a constant nagging feeling that she's just not doing enough, and that she's not good enough. And she doesn't really consider being compassionate to herself. The idea of kind of letting up on the pressure and the expectations that she puts on herself, it seems irresponsible to her. Maybe you can relate. I think many of us have this conditioning. We have to be productive. We have to multitask. It's kind of the American way. And, I think we get confused. I know I have. I've done a lot of work with, the training I've had from Alma, who is the most selfless serving human I've ever seen in my life, to be selfless and, realizing that's such a huge value to me, but at the same time realizing, I have to take care of myself too. And so it's all about balance. It's really all about balance. That's what the middle way is in the Buddhist teaching. It's a way of balance. Can we include taking care of ourselves in the equation? So the second aspect of self-compassion is feeling our common humanity versus isolation. That's why it's so good to talk to each other and share and have support groups. You have the men's support group here. I think we need a women's support group. Don't you think? But I'd love, if anyone wants to head that up, I'll attend. I can't head it up, but I want to come. But, the thing about when she's talking about, common humanity versus isolation is that sometimes we feel like we are so all alone in our suffering. And sometimes, we think we're the only ones struggling. We look on Facebook, everyone's smiling. Here's my great life, right? And we feel like we're the only ones. We're not having that great life. We're having a hard time. But, that's why when we talk to each other, we realize, oh, there's the outer picture, and then there's the inner, more vulnerable experience we're having that we get together, and when we start sharing, it's like such a relief, really. It's that common humanity that, everyone is struggling. Kristen says that we fall into the trap of believing that things are supposed to go well, and when difficulty comes along, we think something must be terribly wrong, And the voice in our head says, excuse me, there must be some error. I signed up for the everything will go swimmingly well until the day I die plan. Hello? Can I speak to the management here? There's a quote I've always loved from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we'd find sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. But I would expand that and say if we could just read the secret history of everyone, it would break our hearts open. It would break our hearts open, and we would have like a spontaneous, effortless compassion to realize what everyone is going through, mostly alone, a lot of the time. And it's part of what happens is people feel shame about their suffering because they feel like they're doing something wrong. And yet, that makes us more alone and feel more isolated. So we need support. We need to develop means of support. I'm giving a June retreat, May 1st through 3rd, and it's incredibly supportive. It's an incredibly intimate place where we open, we release, we're vulnerable, and we leave feeling so renewed. So I hope you guys will come. The third element of self-compassion is being mindful versus over-identifying. And when we over-identify, we get lost in the feelings and story, and it spirals. I mean, it spirals out of control. For instance, say we have an off day, we feel bad. That night we can't sleep because our mind is spinning. By morning we wake up and it's snowing a foot outside, right? And and all this adds up. And even though all these things are temporary and they're manageable in general, it all adds up and we get into a really dark mood. Anybody? If we can bring in mindfulness, that means we remember, okay, take a breath. This is temporary. This is a temporary state. This too shall pass. We can stop resisting what is, and we can make peace with it. When I got here this, 2 weeks ago, all this snow, I was resisting it for about 3 days. I was like, it's green grass in Ashland and there's daffodils blooming, But I just realized I'm going to suffer if I don't get over this, Resistance. It's all resistance to what is and where I am now. And practicing non-judgment, I spoke on that, last month. That, just allow our feelings, practice acceptance, have compassion for it all. Part of why we suffer, another big reason, is because we want to be in control, right? I heard a great Dharma talk recently from the Buddhist monk Anam Tubten, and he describes that so much of our struggle comes from trying to be in control. He says, we try to perform this huge feng shui on the universe. We try to rearrange everything. Sun here, moon here, I'm in the center, no death or old age or suffering, and, just everlasting youth and everlasting pleasure, right? And that's what we try to do. And, we are creators. We talk about how we create and we're powerful creators, but there are other forces at work. There are other creators, co-creators. There's cause and effect. There's the creator, the source of all that is. So there is great peace in realizing that we're not in control. Things are impermanent. Let's be at peace with what is. And have compassion for desperately trying to control. Pema Chodron talks about that a lot. She says, having compassion starts with having compassion for all those unwanted parts of ourself. Yeah. So in closing, I invite you to reflect this week, just reflect on a few questions. How do you treat yourself? How do you talk to yourself when you feel like you failed at something or you're suffering? I mean, do you beat yourself up for suffering? An exercise that's really helpful when you're struggling is to write a letter or an email. I do this often. I write an email to myself from the loving presence I am, from the inner friend of myself, and I give myself comfort and support and guidance. It really helps, and then I read it and I feel better. It's a lot cheaper than seeing a therapist. So in closing, may we each grow in being there for ourselves. May we never abandon our precious selves. And may we find wholeness in the whole mess that life can be. And remember that no one is more worthy of love than you. Remember that. Om Shanti. Thank you all.